Okay, good morning, ladies. Nothing better than Sunday morning, getting out for a little bit of spiritual internal reinforcement, and actually probably nothing better than having Rebbetzin Gottlieb in town. And our first thanks also go to Tal here for hosting us, Rebbetzin Ruthie Halberstadt and Seed. And the nice part is that we do this all together. When we can all take all our resources and put it together, that's really the ideal of what we want to be able to get to with Israel. So I also have to thank the Ezekiels and wish them all mazel tov for us having the honor of Rebbetzin and Rabbi Gottlieb in town. And I can tell you one thing's for sure, that we all feel it. So let's just take our time and enjoy having you here. And then we'll all be joining you soon in our song.
That's what that's saying. Okay. So my topic now is suffering. So there are two ways in which you could present this as a topic. One is to try to make suffering sound wonderful. It's really good for you, okay, which it is, but you can't experience it as good at the time. Otherwise, it wouldn't be suffering. Okay. Another way to present it is to present it as being not good, but dues that you have to pay for living your life, which is to some degree true, but not completely. So I want to avoid these two ways of looking at it and tell you something else. I want to ask you something. Is suffering part of life or not? What would you say? It absolutely is. There's nobody who has no suffering in their life. Is that true? Yes. So that means if it's part of life, it's part of the plan. So the first thing that you would have to understand is take it at that. The same God who makes the sunshine, the same God who makes food taste good, the same God who created color, he created reality in a way in which we will experience suffering. It's a given. The question would be why? And what do we do with it? Which is more important as a question? Why or what? What would you say? How many of you would say why? How many of you would say what? So it's important to realize that these are two different questions. And from my perspective, what is much more important. But we will talk about why. Okay, so Malbim talks about why. And he tells us that there are three basic perspectives we could have. So one perspective. Think of somebody who's heroic. Anybody who you see as heroic. Jewish, non-Jewish, alive or dead. A heroic person. No shit. Okay, Moshe, you'll all agree Moshe was heroic. Okay, so let's start from the beginning of his life. He's brought up in Paro's palace. Nonetheless, he chooses to identify with the Jews and go down and work with the Jews. Was that easy or hard? It was hard. It was a very, very big decision. And it was one that cut him out of the framework in which he was living. Okay, he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew, and he killed the Egyptian to save the Jew. Do you think he knew what the consequences of that would be? Of course, he's not going to get away with that. Was that hard or easy? Hard. They're missing years of Moshe's life. Those are the years where we don't know what he had to do to become who he is. Part of what we know about is that he chose to be Jewish, he killed the Egyptian. What we don't know has to do with his not experiencing something. Because he said, he overcame, and that's why. Okay, and you could take that further into his life, his return to Egypt, facing Paro, knowing that the whole country has been looking for him. Could that have been easy to have the courage to walk right back into that trap? Couldn't have been easy. And splitting the sea, and I can go on and on. Is that true? So give me a non-Jewish here. Someone you think lived a noble life. Gandhi. Okay. So Gandhi's life, could he have chosen violence? Yes. He could have. He didn't. Was it easier to choose violence or non-violence?
Probably non-violence.
Non-violence was better, but non-violence would have been easier. What makes Gandhi a hero was that he chose non-violence. Do you see where this is true? So the first reason why there has to be challenge, and challenge always involves suffering to some degree at least, is that we were meant to be noble. We're meant to make something of our lives. So this is why one of the worst things that could happen to a person is to be imprisoned for decades and decades, even if the prison conditions are humane. There are no choices, there's no growth, there are no challenges. Does this make sense to you? Okay, so a challenge means something through which God allows you to learn to become who you are already, but hasn't yet been expressed. So, because the prison is one in which lends itself towards that. I'll give you a positive example. I don't know if you've ever read Natan Sharansky's autobiography. Have you read it? If you were to read it, you would see that he had the inner resources, but also to some degree the outer possibilities of developing himself. He made a day schedule. This is what time he does this and that. This is what time I pray. This is what time I meditate. This is when I exercise. Only this much time for sleep. No sleeping during the day hardly. This is when it's lunch. This is when it's mincha. This is when I could give myself permission to review life events. No daydreaming other than that. Very, very rigid and playing chess with himself in his mind. Okay. But if he was in the kind of prison that one sometimes read about, where the work is constant and the conditions, like in prisons in India, where people stand like this because there's no room to sit or to lie down, and work is demanded, it's very hard to develop yourself. Okay, so moving beyond that, it says concerning Abraham, after the Akedah, he was asked to bring up his son, which he assumed up as a sacrifice, right? At least this is what Hashem wanted him to assume. And in the end, he stands by the test. He was willing to give anything to Hashem. What does it say? Ata yadati kirelekim. Now I see that you fear God. And what about yesterday? So the answer is the potential was clearly there yesterday. But the actualization of potential only comes through challenge. For having potential on the inside, you could be this or you could be that. When is that going to bring you reward? When you actually do it. So here, I know this is England, this may work or may not work. If it was California, it would for sure work. In New York, it could go either way. Any of you willing to share a moment in which you could say it was hard and I did it? I'm right about England. Okay. Going once, go. Okay, yeah.
Mental health with a child.
Okay, good. So mental health with a child is a terrible challenge. Is that not so? Having a child with mental health issues is what you need. Okay, what are the possibilities? Let's think about that. What are possibilities that people have? Institutionalizing. Okay, not institutionalizing, but institutionalizing, if you know what I mean. Creating a lot of distance. Being on the child's team, caring for him, and bringing forth his potentials as maximally as one can. Asking for help when that isn't always easy. Is that true? Forget about the effect on the child for a moment. Could you see where each of those choices would genuinely change the parents? So that's one possibility of suffering. One possibility of suffering involves challenge. So that would mean from that perspective, there are more reasons for suffering than that. From that perspective, what's the best question? We said, what is important? You realize you're being challenged. You have several possibilities in front of you. What's the best thing to do next?
Not put your ego ahead of you.
Mm-hmm. Let go of your ego, and people on a very high level say, great. This is like an athlete being told, you know what? You're ready to try the 4.5 minute run. No, people have done that. There are choices we make that once they're made can't be unmade. And there are habits that we develop. I don't mean habits like brushing your teeth. I mean habits like responding to situations in a specific way. For instance, how many of you have ever had the great pleasure of taking a 2-year-old to the supermarket? Any of you ever had that great pleasure? Okay, so here you are at the checkout, where they put all the things a 2-year-old shouldn't touch. Have you noticed this? Razor blades, lurid magazines. Okay. So the child is like lunging at everything. And does it help to reason with a 2-year-old?
Mhm.
I really think that this is instrumental towards your further growth. So I request of you, okay, this is not the, okay. The person back of you in the checkout is perfect. You know what I mean? She's like wearing a really good outfit, shoes that look like they came from the box, okay, and perfect makeup, and for sure she's a lawyer, yeah. Okay. And says, can't you take care of your child? Could you picture giving your child a chocolate just to shut him up? How many of you can picture doing this? If you repeat this often enough, the child will develop a habit. What's the habit? It's a learned habit. Cry, make a fuss, make people go over the edge equals get. Receive. Are there people who do this at 50? Are there? Okay. So fab, so you have 5 things that make you you. Again, heredity, environment, potentials, choices, and habits. Was there anybody exactly like you? Will there be anybody just like you? No. Hashem created this extraordinary level of individuation in order for each person to fill in their space in the whole. Nobody's replaceable. The Goyim have says, well, there are lots of irreplaceable people in the cemetery. You know what? No one's replaceable. The people who die served their function in their time, but they were there. It's important that they were there. They're not replaceable. Okay, so you have your mazal. Meaning Hashem will give you the tools you need to fulfill your highest potential as an individual. Okay, so do we always like the tools he gives us? Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't, okay? So there's a famous story in the Gemara about Hillel, the great Mishnaic sage, Hillel. Okay, he was desperately poor. Do you think he chose that? No one chooses poverty. Okay, he was a wood chopper, and in the winter he had really little parnasa because who needs wet wood? Okay, came the day, he normally had enough money from his earnings to take half of it home and to buy whatever was needed for the day, and half of it, to give you an idea of how pitiful his earnings were, to pay the gatekeeper in the house of studies. How much could the gatekeeper have taken? Okay, when he had nothing. Nothing. He didn't even want to go home. What is he going home? To give nothing? So he stayed there. He wanted to hear the lecture. He couldn't pay the gatekeeper. He couldn't get in. He climbed onto the roof and was listening through the skylight. And he was so enwrapped in the Torah that was being taught that he didn't even notice when it began to snow. The people below noticed the shadow in the skylight. They took him down and saved him. Okay. So why do you think this story is recorded in the Talmud? So this is what love of Torah means. You can understand that you'll climb on the roof to your lecture when you have nothing. Okay, now where is Hillel today? It's been around 2,000 years since this took place. Where is he? Is in Gan Eden. You could see this. And in Gan Eden, if he was asked to zero in on his best hour, what would that be? When he climbed onto the roof. You could picture that, a replay of that. Okay, now, let's go back 2,000 years earlier. Suppose on the way up to the roof, a wind came, and there's a 50 shekel note. He grabs it. He says, oh, this is my lucky day. And he would go down, pay the gatekeeper, go home with the money, and he would think this is my best day. But in Gan Eden, would that be a bit? No, it would be nothing. So everyone has mazel, which are the tools for which you could become yourself. And these tools are your tools. They're only for you. They're not interchangeable. So what that means is using your tools should be something you take some pride in. Okay, so Hillel needed money like a duck needs water skis. Understand what I'm saying? He didn't need money to be Hillel. That wouldn't make him Hillel. And there's mazel that feels good. Sometimes mazel feels good. Okay, sometimes it doesn't. So Yosef, from the Torah, was very good looking. Do people like to be very good looking? Yeah. If you could press a button, be very good looking or whatever, or other. You all pick very good looking, no? Okay. So I mean, the girls used to like climb on the wall to get a glimpse of him. If you were 17, would that feel good? Yeah. Okay. So when Potiphar's wife was after him and he resisted and he was arrested and he's sitting on the bench waiting for the verdict, it's his word and her word. He had every reason to think who would be believed. She would. At that moment, do you think he rejoiced a lot about his looks? No. But he needed that to be an example to us. Forgive, how far do you go to maintain morality? As far as Yosef. That's how far you go. And he could have become embittered. So they did the right thing, and look what's happening to me. He could have become embittered. It says in Tehillim, when did he become Yosef? The answer is in prison. More even than when he resisted the temptation. In prison, he chose not to be embittered. That was his highest moment. It says, Amarat Hashem Torafahu, the words of Hashem purified him. So I want you to go to the dream sequence. Okay, two strangers come down the stairs, they're being thrown into the prison. Okay, the baker and the butler. If he was wrapped up in his own pain, would he even notice them? No. Days later, they look upset. Would he care about somebody else being upset? No, he'd be wrapped up in himself. Yosef saying, what's wrong? And listening to their dreams and giving interpretation. Okay, this is what led to what in his life? His release from prison, his empowerment, his bringing his family and saving them from famine. Everything came from his living up to his mazal. You have Hillel and his mazal, Yosef and his mazal. One more example. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the editor of the Mishnah, was fabulously wealthy. Okay, do you think everybody who's fabulously wealthy does well with it? Mm-hmm. Not always. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. He's the example of someone who did well with it. His wealth was so enormous that the only one who exceeded his wealth in his time was the Roman emperor of that period. On his deathbed, which is a time people don't fool around too much, he said, it's not fun. Okay, whatever. Okay. He lifted his hands to heaven. He said, God, you know the truth. I never took anything just for me. It's always for your glory, for other people, for helping the Jews. It was never just for me. Okay, so he did well with his mazal. Okay, being poor like Hillel wouldn't have worked for him. For Hillel to be rich wouldn't have worked for him. Okay, so everyone here in this room has their own mazal. Okay, so mazal could be categorized as a life situation that you didn't choose, but that came to you. There are things you choose, there are things you don't. It's clear? Okay, so now we have two things, challenge and mazal. Third one. Okay, so the third one is, okay, shall I use the word that nobody likes? Punishment. Okay. So, in fact, this word is so unpopular that whenever I use it in B'nos Avigail, even, certainly in the bed, but even in B'nos Avigail, isn't that a Christian concept? No, it's not a Christian concept. Remember where they got all of their stuff from? Okay, whatever. Okay, so how does punishment work? So I want to differentiate between Hashem's punishment and ours. Okay, do adults punish each other? But let's leave that alone. Let's talk about punishing a child for a moment. Let's say your child has this habit. He's like 4. He goes into the kitchen and he likes to turn on the gas jets because it makes a funny noise. Then it makes a smell. And then everybody gets excited. It's like, so you can do it again. And it always has the same result. You go in, when no one's looking, you turn it on, You go and it makes the smell and everybody gets excited, okay? At some point, do you have to punish the child because he's not listening? Or what? Or you could all die of asphyxiation. That's option B, which is generally not used. I mean, you could try rewarding. I'll give you something if you don't turn on the gas, or whatever. But then you have to pull him away and you have to say sharply, don't do that. Now, will he perceive that as punishment? Of course. No one likes to be yelled at. You're walking, it's the same mischievous 4-year-old, walking with him in the street. He runs, he lets go of your hand, runs into the road. Does that happen? And you draw him back, you say, no, it's dangerous. Okay. Fifth time. Okay. You're not supposed to say, well, let me give you a new word. It's called velocity. That's not what you're supposed to do. You have your hand. He has a certain part of his body that's rather soft. Okay, whatever. Okay. Okay, that's what punishment is about for humans. Human punishment has to do with, I can't control the situation. The situation will bring about negative results. And therefore, to take charge, I have to cause somebody to experience pain. That's why humans punish. God has options. It's not the same thing. So to understand how divine punishment works, I want to suggest something to you. We sometimes dig holes and get in deeper and deeper and deeper. Do we sometimes do this for ourselves?
Yeah.
We do. And do we notice it? Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So this has to do with addictive behaviors. This has to do with all sorts of negative choices that we make that once you're there, you don't have the strength to get out. It's too humiliating to get out. You could picture this? So sometimes God will do you a favor if you deserve it and stop you in your tracks. Okay, and that's what divine punishment is about. It's to offer you new choices to replace the choices you've chosen until now. New choices. So Rambam divides these new choices into categories: financial suffering, physical suffering, and the harshest one is vicarious suffering. Let's look at financial suffering. Okay, does any of you know somebody who suffered financially? Okay, so the way it works is that your choices change. Let's say 2 months ago, you could afford to get whatever you want, and you do. And now 2 months pass, and suddenly the bank's on the phone, and you look at your email and you see the worst responses that you could have possibly envisioned are happening. You can't make that choice anymore. That's true. You have to make new choices. So I want to survey you and think about this for half a second. What are the worst choices a person could make if they have terrible financial reverse? And what are the best choices? This side is the worst, this side is the best. Okay, what is the terrible choices a person could make if they experienced really serious financial loss?
Stealing. Stealing.
Stealing. Do people do that? They're desperate, so they steal?
Gambling.
What?
Gambling.
Gambling. Anything. I'll try anything. Do people do this?
Mm-hmm.
They do. I remember years ago, there was a case in America, in a certain city with a large frum population. There was a man who was selling treif meat as though it was kosher. And by the way, a seminary girl caught him. Did you know this? Then she got a little summer job working in the financial office, and she noticed too much money's coming in compared to what's going out. She figured it out. She went to the Rav. The Rav sent people to observe what was happening, and that's how he was caught. So part of the reason why this was happening is he was in terrible financial distress. He borrowed money on the gray market, and the Italian brothers were letting him know that he better pay on time. He was scared. He should have gone to the Rav. He should have gone to the police. There were a lot of he should haves. Did we stand in his shoes? No. Okay. Did he do a bad thing? Yes. Okay. So why am I giving you this as an example? Okay. There are all sorts of bad bad responses people can make. Okay, that's a bad response. Good response, somebody loses their money. What's a good response they could make alternatively?
Costs.
What?
Cut the costs and reevaluate.
Okay, if they could reevaluate, that's good.
Explore other skills and professions.
Explore what else is open.
Yeah.
So I want to give you two examples. I'm sure, I don't know if you see this much in England on news clips when there are terrible natural disasters like floods, which happen in America fairly often, like at least once or so a year. They'll show the rescue crews rescuing people out of their homes, and they interview them. And a lot of the interviews go like this: "You've lost your home. What are you feeling, Mr. Smith?" "I think as long as I'm okay and Mary's okay and the kids are okay, I will just thank the Lord." That's a good response. Okay, it's a good response. He's being real. Holocaust survivors who lost everything oftentimes go to that response. "I survived. My wife and kids survived. It's a miracle. I'm going to worry about the house in Poland." Okay, clear? Okay, so there are good responses. I'm going to disguise the story a little bit. The other ones are as they happened. Because the people involved are English, so I'm disguising it a little bit. Was a man, got married. He studied in Kollel for a little while. Then they ran out of money. I'm sure you've heard of this. Sometimes in Kollel, people run out of money. He ran out of money, and he started working in business, and he was enormously successful. Over the top successful. He became a big name in philanthropy, big. And I think it was for the Cannery Wharf project. He kept on throwing in more and more and more money, lost everything. And he ends up taking an ordinary job. I think he worked in a bookstore or something like this. And I called his wife, who was a friend. I said, "How's it going?" She said, "I didn't grow up with a lot. I could handle it." So I said, "How's your husband?" And she said, "You know what he said? I have nothing to be ashamed of the way I used money when we had it. I gave charity. I didn't show off. God wants me to get a different assignment. I'll sell books in the store. I'll have integrity, and we'll live within our means." That's what he said. Is that a winner? It's a winner. Okay, so that's financial loss. Is it a punishment? So it feels bad. Is that true? Mm-hmm. Because it feels bad and it's a consequence of choices, we'll call it punishment, but it's not like human punishment. It's not out of frustration and anger and inability to change things. Okay, physical suffering is much worse than financial suffering because you take yourself with you wherever you go, so there's no natural respite. Okay, you all know people who are physically ill? Worst case, one of the worst responses to physical illness. Depressed, scared, angry, embittered, suicidal. What are some other, I can get. Okay. Unable to move beyond the pain itself, focusing only on the illness. Okay. Are there people like this? Could any of us judge them? Okay, good responses. People who responded well to physical disability? What were their responses? I'll make every day the best I can. I invite you to go on to the ACE site and look up the name Rachamim Kohen Melamed. Rachamim Kohen Melamed. He was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, and that's when he was 53. He immediately went into action. How long do I have? What can I do? Every stage along the way, he went into action. He outlived the expectations. His doctors died, but he didn't. And I saw the last clip that they have. He's died since these clips were made. He was totally disabled. He was in a tilted wheelchair. He actually was one of the pioneers of this, which is now used internationally, being able to communicate with his eyes using computer technology. How did he spend his days at that stage? And there are many stops along the way. He would communicate with kids who were hopeless, who were addicted, or have come from abusive families, and give them hope. And he was credible. He was on Israel TV, and they had, I think actually it was Yair Lapid. I didn't see the show, people told me about it. But there's a TV MC who would have controversial people go on and get a little pepper into the audience. So he brought somebody who was a very big proponent of assisted suicide. He went on how some people's lives reach a point where they no longer, life no longer has meaning. And if they can't communicate, we could assume we know what they would want in that circumstance. And it led into a discussion on euthanasia, et cetera, et cetera. And after the man was finished, and everybody in the audience is convinced, yes, there comes a point where your life has no meaning, they brought out Kohen Malam. And all he had to say, translated on the mic, was what? The youth have the right to judge whether or not my life has meaning. That kind of a debate. So there are people who respond very, very nobly to this. Is that true? So, okay, you'll stay on the line. Just take out your calendar. So I'll tell you one more story, then I will start tying it together. Okay, Maisa Shahai. There was a man in New York who worked in an office, and the man in the adjoining office was non-religious, Jewish, but totally not religious. And his workmate, I'm going to make up names for these people, Howie, his workmate, said to Menachem, who works there, I'm getting married. Got married, Menachem came. Time passed. They've been working in this office forever. A year passed, 2 years, 5 years. But finally, Menachem finally breaks down and says, the only reason we got married, you know that Kathy and I were friends a long time, but we want children, and it's not happening. We tried this and we tried that. And we went to this specialist and that specialist. And Menachem said, look, Howie, you're Jewish. So is Kathy. Yes, you could have a name like Kathy and be Jewish. Okay. Why don't you go to Israel and pray at the Holy Wall? God might answer it. You tried all the doctors. You tried all the naturalists. What do you lose? He decided to do it. Now, Menachem had a brother-in-law in Israel, and he called him. He said, help them. They won't know what to do. You have to go to the hotel and pick them up. They give and then they have babies. Okay, so I don't know which road they took him to, but he took them to some tzaddik, and the tzaddik was totally unaware of who Howie and Kathy are, and it was winter in Israel, so she's dressed, So he asked her, do you keep mikveh? And he said, what he say? And what did the Israeli brother-in-law say? You wash up? You go in the mikveh, and she had no idea. So she said, I take a shower. What? So he tells the Rav, she doesn't go to the mikveh, she just takes showers. Okay. The Rav says, well, she should keep mikveh. This whole communication ends up very bad. You can picture this. Okay, worse and worse by the moment. So they left. She's crying. Howie is confused. He calls up Menachem. I said, Menachem, I don't think this is really what I had. So Menachem now said, no, your prayers at the Kotel are important, and this rabbi didn't know you, and maybe let's try it. You'll meet someone who speaks English, and he can explain things to you, and you'll feel better. So he made some emergency calls to people who have connections in Miri Yeshiva, arranged for them to meet Rav Nosson Tzvi. He was from Chicago and English speaking and very compassionate. Okay, so they got there. Now when they got there, it was during the day, and it was warm. So she was dressed as one dresses on warm days in Yerushalayim. So the Rebbetzin immediately hugged her as she sort of drew her into his life and said, I'm so happy you came to my house. It's such a kavod. You came from all the way far and you're visiting with us. But my husband is very religious. And even when I go into a study, I'm always covered. So she gave her a wrap and matched the wrap to pearls that she also gave her to wear. So now we'll go in together. Okay, so I go in. At that point, Rav Nosson Tzvi was towards the end of his life. He was lying on the couch and he was shaking. And they felt ridiculous for having come. Like, what are we doing here? Rav Nosson Tzvi picked up on their being ill at ease. And he said, come closer. You'll hear me better from close. I'm like you, I'm from Chicago. Okay. So they came close and he said, what brings you here? So they told him their whole story and there were some tears. And he said, you know what? I'll pray for you and you pray for me because we have something in common. And he said, what do we have in common? He said, you're suffering and I'm also suffering. We'll pray for each other. I don't know, people like, what happened to the couple? I don't know what happened to the couple. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that physical suffering can take you to very hard places. So vicarious suffering is even harder because you can't control somebody else's suffering. Vicarious suffering means somebody close to you, like a child is ill. You can't fix them. That's much harder than dealing with your own suffering. Bad responses.
Trying to control it.
You keep on trying to control it and it can't be controlled. Not accepting the child as they are, which is not an uncommon response. Detaching, and I'm giving you worst case, divorce, abandoning the child. Okay, do people do all of this? Okay. Good responses. Unconditional love, acceptance. Okay, building, becoming more compassionate, sharing your experience with other parents who have similar situations. Then if you hear of Shalva, that's what Shalva is all about. She had a child who was majorly disabled. She made a respite center because she knew that this is what people need. Okay, this is clear? So now we have three aspects of suffering. We have suffering that's part of mazal, which means it fits your personality, it's what you need in life. You have suffering that's a challenge, it's meant to bring forth what has not yet been forth in you. You have suffering that's there to bring you out of a hole you may have dug. Okay, we have three kinds of suffering. So in each kind, here are some questions that are not constructive. How come somebody else isn't suffering? I would feel so much better if only they also, whatever. Is that human nature? Yes. So a lot of why me isn't just why me. It's like, why not them? Okay. Okay, that's not constructive. Okay, denying of the suffering is not destructive, isn't constructive. Okay, closing your eyes to the possibility of alternative responses is probably the least constructive of all. Okay, so that's where suffering is coming from. And the what, you have to figure out yourself. Because by definition, the what is individual for each person. But the why gives birth to a what that could give your life more meaning and depth. To the point, in Olam Haba, the Gemara says this, we hear ourselves judge. Nothing is forgotten in Olam Haba. We're judged with greater compassion than we have. Okay, so we're content with the judgment except for one thing. What do you think the one thing that we're discontent about in Olam Haba? We'll tell Hashem, why didn't I suffer more? If I would have had challenge, if I would have had difficulty, if you would have pulled me out of the hole of suffering, I would have lived a meaningful life. Why did you let me just coast? What do we say in this world? No suffering, please, Lord have mercy. No, and that's normal. But realize that that's where it's for. And when you're busy doing your what I do next? Realize that there are two traits that are universal that oftentimes make things worse. One is ego, and the other is desire. Ego, I have to have things my way. If things are not my way, then Okay? It's not going to do, it's not good. Desire, I want it to be like this. I enjoyed it like this. Without this, okay, don't go down these two paths. And the truth is, suffering usually doesn't let you. Okay, so if you have any questions, the time is now.
Sorry, what was the ego and?
Desire, physical desires.
We do nothing to show not to give us a lot of wrong. We do nothing, but we shouldn't suffer.
That's right. Because oftentimes we blow it. I want to explain to you. I'm here, I'm on the roof. I'm saying, everybody else has money. I have to go on this stupid roof. Okay, we don't always do it right. Okay. Okay, so this is the problem. The problem is if we had a guarantee that we will do it. Not we could, but if we had a guarantee that we will, then it would be not worth it to not ask for suffering, but we have no guarantees there.
What are the three types of suffering?
We have challenge, we have punishment, and we have muzzle.
What about ongoing suffering? Sometimes it's goes on and on.
So that's part of muzzle, and I will open the door that probably wouldn't have enough time to deal with properly. Nobody's life begins the day they were born. The Arizal said in his time, we've all been here before. So sometimes ongoing suffering in this life is a consequence of other lives or another life. And so that's why the reason for suffering is both irrelevant, since the only relevant question is what, and why is sometimes unanswerable. So there's a famous story told of the Chazon Ish. Towards the end of his life, he was very frail, and moving about was very difficult. When people would bring him children to class, the children with special needs, he would always rise and walk them to the door, which was very difficult for him. So one of his students said, Rebbe, this child doesn't even know. Why are you doing this? He's so limited. You're right, he doesn't know. He has so little left to fix. His box of potentials is so small, he could do it. He could do it in this lifetime. I have so much potential. He had no illusions about his brilliance. He knew who he was. Had nothing doing it. The child is more than.
When we spoke about like God punishment, like because in the end of the day, like how do we know it's like it's a punishment? Like, do we have to take that into account or not?
You don't have to. This one said the word why, unless it's very, very, sometimes it's very obvious. Like you're supposed to give a tenth of your money to tzedakah, and then the same day you lose that sum. Oh, maybe these two things have or whatever. But by and large, we can't do that. What is what's important? And Navi, when the Nevi'im say, this is happening and this is happening, why don't you do tshuva? They're not pointing out specific individuals. They're saying here are directions of things that really need fixing, which I think we all see. And in your own life, you'll have to ask what. Going once. Going twice.
What about things that you have failed on? How do you view those in your life? Things you can't go back to and fix, and things that are negative, right?
Yes. Yes,
How do you view things like that?
so have good news and bad news. What do you want first? The bad news is, except for hurting someone financially, where you could give them back money. Most of the time when we do things wrong, they're not so easily repaired. Okay. We can't bring back the past. So what you can do is, I have to tell you a story. I had a student who had done something genuinely terrible. And she had had an affair with her brother-in-law, her sister friend. This is irreparable. So she was terribly depressed. I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew she was this zombie-like girl hanging around the bed. And you can't just go over to someone and say, how come you are acting like a zombie? It's like it's not nice. Not done. So she finally confided in me. She told me what she'd done. It was too big for me. So I went to Rabbi Shalkovsky without telling them which girl I'm talking about. The girl did this and this. Who would know what to tell them? Go with her to Rav Simcha Wasser. So I had met him before, but he was like a short man in town, very Santa Claus. Yeah. And it was remarkable because he had a life full of terrible suffering, but he was like, so I said, all right, this is what Rabbi told me to do. I'll take it on. You know, sometimes that's what you want to have, take no responsibility. Somebody tells you to just go and do it. So as soon as I got there, this is not going to work. Okay, she's like spaced out. I'm taking her to their apartment on the Close right in the Bible Belt. And yeah, the Rebbetzin opens the door. She looks like a Rebbetzin. She's older. And she brings him and she's nice. That made it much worse. I'll come in. Reb Simcha, look, here are some girls from the seminary. Isn't that wonderful? Please, I thought you were going to die.
She probably wanted to.
Just what do you want? What do you want to drink? I have cookies. Do you like chocolate or do you like chocolate chip? And the girl, of course, is saying, what? Nothing. And it was, oh, I think we're not so hungry right now, but we'll just wait for the road. Okay. So she finally gets into it good. And the girl is like not saying anything. So I'll have to open this. So I said, you know, this is Cindy. That's, of course, not her real name. And she's from Pittsburgh. And her sister got married. What's the worst that we got the next? Mazel tov! When I died. Well, no, the problem is like nobody in this picture is like they don't observe Torah like at all. And her brother-in-law is a very attractive man. He got the whole. As soon as said attractive man, he got the whole story. So he went up to his bookshelf. He took down a Rambam. He said, "You're the teacher. You know the Rambam?" And I was smart enough. I said, "No." Okay. So, what was the laws concerning murder? Suppose you kill someone. Can't bring you. So what do you have to do? You have to put life into the world, save lives. Suppose you steal and your victim died or you can't find them, you have to give money to a public charity. You have to put back what you took. If you did a terrible thing, you have to put that, you have to put holiness and sanctity back into the world. You told them one day you'll get married and you'll work and you'll have money, you're going to have to build it. It was like watching the revival of the dead. She left there, she's going to get married, she's going to have a future, she's going to... So you have to find, if you do things that can't be fixed, which we all do, you have to find some way of compensating it, if not directly, even indirectly. Go. That's it.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask for anything else. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. It would just be excited to be able to share all that is good. We should really be able to do everything within our own personal lives and take what you teach us and put it into action and enjoy together in Yerushalayim very, very soon. And 1 minute, ladies. Yes, because this is a very important.
Whenever I go to Chutz La'aretz, I always raise money for some tzedakah or other. So this year's tzedakah is that my daughter is associated with an organization in Yerushalayim that helps widows and orphans. So what she wants me to do, this is the assignment she gave me, is to raise as much money as possible for the Hanukkah weekend for widows. They have a lot of widows in this organization. I think it's something like 200, I'm not sure, more even. And for Hanukkah, she likes to take them away to a beautiful resort where everything is done, where it's perfect. The food and the entertainment and the babysitting. Because when they're home, there's no husband to light the candles. And a lot of them are young and they don't cope so well. So she asked me to not just to collect money, this is her latest, okay, but for people to write me emails in which you say you're going to take on yourself to collect some money from your friends. The suggested amount was 100 pounds. Not necessarily from you, but from your friends. So here's my email. So what you have to do is to notify me that you're going to do this. She will send you back more information, and she has tax receipts that you can get. So my email is Zipporah, TZIPORAH, 48, the number 48, @gmail.com. And again, this is for you to say that this is what you will do. And it has to be done shortly because Hanukkah is shortly.